So let's see what we are going to discuss, and I will explain a little bit more about this session, so you get the proper expectations about what you're going to see. So the name of the session is Citrix Best Practices, What Still Holds Up. So if you just look at the title, like Citrix Best Practices, Citrix is a very, like a fairly large solution as it stands today, right? You can be doing like a Citrix XenApp or a Citrix Zen Desktop, and then if you are doing any of these, you may be doing using PVS or not using PVS for whatever reason, or using MCS. And then when you talk about your web front end, you may be doing Citrix web interface for several reasons. You may already be doing Citrix storefront. So as you can see, it's a fairly large thing. So it would be pretty much impossible trying to fit in a 75-minute session all the best practices for every single Citrix component out there, okay? So the idea of this session really, it was to go through several Citrix documents regarding best practices, take a look at them, extract what I think are the most interesting ones, and then sort of evaluate if these make sense still to this day, okay? So that's the idea of this session. And as I said, it was a lot of work and discussions with other people to see what they are doing. Because again, a best practice at the end of the day, in my mind, is really like a starting guideline. It doesn't mean it will apply for every single person, every single environment, for whatever reason. And we're going to see a couple of these reasons, okay? So don't take this as, the Citrix Bible of what you should do. That's not the point. This is really, these things you should be aware of. They may or may not apply to you. Certain things that I found coming from Citrix or vendors, they are like bullshit. It's crap, so don't follow. Or if you want to really make it work, yes, don't follow this particular document. So that's the idea here, okay? So my name, right there, Claudio Rodrigues. You have my email address, Twitter. So if you need to get in touch for whatever reason, questions, if you want a copy of the presentation, if you like me, whatever, you have my email address right there. Okay? All good? You understand why you are here? Yes? Okay. Just want to cover that. So the agenda. I'll list, again, some of the components. I will not try to list every single component, but the ones I consider the most important ones on a Citrix environment. And then we go to a conclusion. Fairly simple, okay? The problem is there are several components. So between the two items on the agenda, we have maybe 300 slides. So I'll try to be 2 seconds per slide and we are done. And then questions and answers. Okay, best practice. So how this whole thing started. As far as I remember, and some of the old Citrix guys here can, attest, several years ago, well, first of all, have you guys been using or deploying Citrix solutions for more than 10 years? Anyone? Okay, that's good. Okay. But you guys don't count, so really, out of these guys, maybe 2 or 3, okay. But the idea was, several years ago, some crazy, people, one in particular, Rick D, he's sitting right there. That's Rick D. That's his brother. Right, Rick? He's here. Well, take a look. Looks like him. That's Cusco from Emperor's New Groove. I always think about you when I watch that movie. It's It's really cool. Yeah, I know. So Rick D, several years ago, well, you started and then other people contributed, and the thing became a monster, massive PDF file called MetaFrame Tuning Tips. How many of you are familiar with the document? Okay, some, okay. So if you are not familiar with this document, don't look for this document on Google, okay? Don't use it. That was like how many years ago, Rick? Yeah. So unless you want to screw up your XenApp 6.5 environment, yes, follow everything that is here. All the registry keys for Windows 3, yeah, apply them. It's going to work really well. So jokes aside, it was a great document at the time. This is like a NT4 Windows 2000 time frame and had like several things. I'll just show you what I'm talking about here. So this is the document. He was still at Citrix at the time. And you see, the funny thing is reviewing this document, like there is still stuff that applies to this day, okay? So I'm not saying, everything here is outdated. Not everything, but a lot of the stuff that we do, for example, on the TCP stack and ICA stack, some of the stuff still applies to this day, okay? But again, this is for an older OS, older products, MetaFrame, time frame. So of course, a lot that is here doesn't apply to this day. But that's how the whole thing started. Like general recommendations, that again, still apply to this day. And then all the registry tweaks and articles, like, massive. Everyone that was doing Citrix had this document open, like back in the day for sure. So that's how the idea for the session came up. So Rick D again. And then what about the more up-to-date best practices? Where did I get these things from? So basically from a couple Citrix documents. You have the links on the presentation. You see several ones. You are going to have a copy of the presentation, so just go for the links and you're going to see. And I will also, to make your life easier, assuming that I'm not breaking any copyrights, whatever, I'll probably zip everything that I got into a file and then host it, unless Citrix gives me shit. But then, I'll tell them to screw off and life goes on. And then there are some best practices also that came from Chuck Norris and Sean Bass, okay? So if you're familiar with Chuck Norris, yeah, he's a Citrix guy too. And then there are some RDS, but the RDS ones God gave, to me in person. So that was a good one. So that's basically where we got all these best practices from, okay? So you're going to have the links, the documents, just look at them. And I'll show you what I found out when I went through all these exercises. And of course, discussions with not only Citrix people, but vendors, consultants that are doing Citrix stuff on a daily basis, just to understand what people are actually seeing on the field. And it's exactly my case. Like I do a lot of consulting work, and for several different types of customers, like a lot of government. The way government does things, it's very different than the way companies, real companies do things. What means, government doesn't do anything right, usually. Don't know if it's the case here. Yeah, same thing. Did you see New Zealand? They spent like 1.5 billion, whatever currency it is in New Zealand. But I know they're complaining. That's like $10,000 US, but still, it's a lot of money. So the components, what are we going to try to cover? XenApp, of course, your Zen Desktop, your PVS, your Edge site, SQL, because everything ties into SQL, a little bit of licensing, web interface, and storefront. Okay? Everything that is not here, it's not here. It's not going to be here. But again, some of the stuff may be in the documents. One of the documents actually is fairly large and tries to cover everything. Like even networking layer, for example, like switches and what you should have like on your switches in terms of settings and so on. So as I said, if I try to put everything here, we would be here for, I don't know, for a day at least. Sounds good? Clear? So let's take a look. So the basics. First of all, some of the stuff is a matter of common sense, really. Okay? I have seen many cases where people are like, oh yeah, let's go from whatever we have to next version, and they buy everything, and then they remember, well, no one actually checked if everything that we are doing is actually compatible with the new release. I have seen this many times, especially with people that are on 2003, like XenApp 5, and now they jump to 6.5, or they go RDS, whatever, and then they are like, yeah, oh, it doesn't work on 64-bit. Yeah, you see? So again, common sense, make sure you check if things are compatible. The other thing, separation of components. I get asked all the time. I don't know, Citrix, it's not as bad as with RDS, but on the RDS side, I get asked all the time, oh, can I install my RDS on my domain controller? Or can I install, you know, whatever on my domain controller? No. But to help the cause, Microsoft published actually a couple weeks ago a document that explains how to install RDS on the domain controller. Like, why are you doing that, Microsoft? So they actually published it. But again, separation of components, you know, you have licensing, whatever, you have SQL, everything on its own. So if you screw up something, you don't bring down like several components in one shot. Again, common sense. Test environment. I have some customers that test everything in production. That's their test environment. And I'm not kidding. Like I'm doing right now a Zen Desktop POC for a government customer. And then I was having an issue, I don't know if some of you guys saw, but there is an issue with DHCP servers. If they have like a short lease, you may have an issue with PVS where the symptom is basically you try to boot your images and then you get a blue screen. The thing is it's really quick, the blue screen, and you can't really see the message. So after I was able to capture the message, I was reading and I was like, man, this has to do with the DHCP. And then I checked, there is an actual Citrix article that explains, you know, you need to change this on your DHCP server so it checks for an IP before it releases. Check if it's not in use already. So I was like, man. So again, if I had a proper test environment, I wouldn't run into that. And then they were like, oh, we can't change our DHCP in production. Well, no shit, you can't. So why are we doing this in production? It's a test. Well, you know, you have customers and customers, right? Then hotfix updates, of course, like I've seen all the time. Another customer of mine, they are actually running Novell. I don't know how many people here still run Novell. Yeah, one guy. I don't like you. Yeah. Yeah, I know. So man, like one of my customers, they are on Novell, whatever, like really old stuff, and then they decided, oh, you know, we should have PVS up and running. Then I'm like, man, PVS with Novell. So that's gonna be fun. Yeah, we got it working, but Jesus Lord, I wouldn't call that stable. It works. You know, as long as it works when I leave, then after I don't care. So if it breaks, well, it's Novell, I told you. So, but they are on Novell like 4, whatever, and they really think if it's working, we don't update or apply any hot fixes. They really think like that. I think the last time they applied a hot fix on XenApp, it was like, I don't know, MetaFrame 1.8. And they're like, man, this is great. No, it's shit. But you know, keep that in mind. Make sure you are up to date. There is a reason why people release updates, okay, and hot fixes. And then there is the whole thing about the management layer. That's something I like to do. Like XenApp, for example, I usually get a couple servers just for all the management. So all the consoles for everything that we need to manage, everything stays there. And that's what that means, access, okay? So they don't touch any other server to reach any of the components. Everything stays on a separate layer. And this is a very important one, okay? I had to adapt my vocabulary to the UK. So here is shite. It's not shit, but at the end it's the same shit. So registry stuff that your best buddy does, with his servers doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for your environment. I've seen that all the time. People, I got this registry file that has all the tweaks from my buddy's XenApp environment, and I'm sure it's going to help us. Well, you are on XenApp 6.5 and your buddy's on XenApp like 1. I don't think it will help. Well, it helped him get a new job, so it was really good. So just keep that in mind, again, falls into the same thing with the best practice. It's not because it's here or in a Citrix document that it will necessarily work for you, okay? And the reasons for that, again, it may be your applications, it may be your network layer, it may be whatever. Okay, some of the best practices, I have seen cases where we could not use some of them because of political reasons. For example, zoning. You shouldn't split your zones or you should have less zones, whatever. But if you're dealing with the government and really angry people and they wanna, control everything, each region controls something, well, there is no other way around. You have to do in a certain way to meet the political crap, inside that agency. So again, common sense and check if it applies to you or not. It may not apply, okay? So this is the basics that applies to every single environment, really, and every single component. So let's take a look at the XenApp, for example. Farms. People always ask, should we do single farm or multiple farms? Well, the reason here, as I said, there could be a geographical reason why you want to split. Like some of my customers, I'm from Canada. Canada is fairly large, so if you are in Vancouver or if you are in Toronto, there is a 3-hour time zone difference, 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers separation. So sometimes you actually want to have different farms, again, for geographical reasons, because the connection is terrible, because, again, political issues. As I said, I deal with the government. Sometimes it's pretty hard to let go, like a department in Vancouver. You go there and you tell them, okay, I'm going to move everything to Toronto and screw you. Then they are like, oh, no. We need to keep our jobs, whatever. So it could be political, okay? Could be a compliance issue. If you move stuff out of whatever zone, then you are not compliant anymore. So just keep that in mind. And risk, again, each environment will have its own reasons. Zones, we usually separate because of geographical reasons. So if I have a zone like in Vancouver, if I have one in Toronto, one on the East Coast, like St. John's, I can keep, for example, ZDC in Vancouver, traffic in Toronto, traffic in St. John's, and then only the data collectors exchange traffic. So that's one example. most cases, according to Citrix best practice, if you read the documents, one zone is fine. And should I have dedicated ZDCs and how many? Well, if you take a look again at the best practice, it gets down to size of the farm. So everything here so far that I read from the Citrix best practice, okay, makes sense. Still to this day. Same thing for dedicated XML brokers, you know, your controllers now on XenApp 6.5. That is right here, controller session only mode. So if you have XenApp 6.5, you should have your controllers, and then you should have the apps on the servers that are session only. So they don't do anything other than serving sessions to the users. Applying fixes and updates to your XenApp environment. The order, you know, it matters because you're going to have different versions, and that may trigger, for example, elections and so on. So this article explains why the order matters and explains how you should update your Citrix XenApp environment. And logging, of course, you know, you should be logging all the time, right? Because you want to know who is doing what. This is very common as well in the government. Like, they don't log anything. I don't know why. I think they want to hide their crap. And that's a good way of doing it. Just don't log it, okay? I think most people here, even for auditing purposes, they log everything. Correctly? Or awesome. So, Zen Desktop falls into the same thing in a certain way. Should I have single or multiple sites? Again, several reasons will decide if you should go single or multiple. They all play a role, really. It falls into the same thing as XenApp. Reboot policy is still important from the best practice. You don't want to, you know, reboot everything at the same time, and then no one can log in, or you can destroy your SAN. Time sync, this really applies to anything. I had another, well, this one customer that I just mentioned that is doing everything in production. We started having like really weird issues with the VMs, like crazy error messages. And then I decided to check, like, you know, the basics. There was no time syncing whatsoever. We had like VMs that were 5 hours ahead and some 3 hours behind. And I'm like, man, do you have like people all over the world? Oh, no, it's just here. Okay, why they are like in 10 different time zones? Yeah, I don't know. Okay, that's why we're having all these weird issues. And the domain controllers like were in, I don't know, like Mars time zone. And then I was like, Jesus. Okay, so make sure everything is in sync, you know, hypervisor, everything. Use NTP, you know, that's a good one. Desktop directory should be dedicated. Well, falls into the same thing that I told you, the management layer. You should dump everything to a management layer. Then you can access all the components from a single place. You'll only screw everything else. And doesn't matter. This is really, it doesn't matter the size of the environment. This is really, you know, best practice. If you are small, still keep all your management stuff in a single location. Don't mix management with all the other stuff. Again, keep that in mind. So what else we have? IOPS. That is a funny one. You probably read, there is a Citrix document, best practice document, and several Citrix articles on their blogs. How many IOPS do I need for Zen Desktop? Did you see that? Okay. So this one, I was talking to Citrix, you know, some of the Citrix SEs, and they were like, oh, you need this. Then I'm like, oh, okay. Then I was talking to the storage vendors, and they were like, oh, you need this. And the two things, they really didn't match. And I'm not talking about like one is suggesting X and the storage vendors are suggesting X plus 10%. It was like very different numbers. So on the best practice, you see like Citrix breaks down into 3 types of users from what I remember. Like a light user, a medium user, and a heavy user, based on usage patterns. And I remember some of the numbers, they are like, oh, assign 7 IOPS, like keep in mind 7 IOPS per desktop. Or if it's a heavy user, go to whatever number. You remember the numbers? Like 20, 30? No? Remember, Rick, some numbers?
Remember, it was really hard to swallow.
Yes, that's the lesson learned here. But the problem is really what happens then at peak. Because you know, you need to remember what you are trying to replace here, especially with Zen Desktop. What are you trying to achieve in many cases? Many people deploying Zen Desktop, they are really trying to get rid of the physical desktop. I don't know if it applies to all of you. Like how many are doing Zen Desktop here? Okay. Are you trying to replace like physical with virtual or not really? Just adding the virtual as another option.
So we're actually trying to give something more powerful to certain users with Zen Desktop rather than XenApp.
Okay. Any other case like that? Because again, if you are trying to replace, you need to remember what you are trying to replace. It's like Brian's keynote yesterday. Today I can walk to whatever store, like Best Buy. I don't know if you guys have Best Buy, if you suffer like we do in America. But if you go to any store, you can buy a computer for $200 that has a really fancy video card, and then for another $100 you can stick an SSD. And man, you're going to have like a fast machine for $300. So if you're trying to replace something that is really fast, and more than that, I don't care if all users turn on their PCs at the same time at the office. If they do, they're not going to affect each other, unless you undersized your electrical. Then we have a different issue. You may burn the whole building if they do that. But assuming your electrical is good, everyone can turn on their PCs at the exact same time and, all good. The PC is going to boot at the same exact time. So when you are trying to replace physical with virtual, the experience at peak, it has to be the same at least. So you can't really tell the user, during 8 and 9 a.m. in the morning when everyone comes to the office, it's going to be really crap. You can't do that. And that's what the numbers here, after I read through them, they don't account for that. They're like just, it's average numbers. Well, average means it's average. So what do I do when peak happens? You have to account for that if you want to keep the user experience. Meaning, if you want to be successful deploying the environment. Because if the user experience sucks, it means you suck according to the users. Okay? Doesn't matter how fancy the solution is. Same may apply to overcommitting CPU. Some of the articles were like, oh yeah, you can do these many VMs per core. I don't know. What are they running? Notepad? Or they're trying to do like video editing on Zen Desktop? Very different things, okay? Upgrades on Zen Desktop, like when I do an upgrade, my experience with Citrix stuff, and I saw that happening on my own environment. I was running like one version of Zen Desktop, then I got the newer version, and I was reading the Citrix best practice and the upgrade documents, and they were like, yeah, just do this. And I was like, okay, let's try. So I did it. No, didn't work. So my experience with Zen Desktop is when they tell you upgrade, like upgrade every single component. If they tell you, oh, just do the VDA, that's bullshit. It's not going to work. Okay? I've seen really weird cases where we upgraded the VDA only according to Citrix, and then, weird things started happening. And then I contact Citrix, and they're like, oh, did you upgrade the VDA only? Yes. Oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you told me yesterday I should. So what is the best practice at the end of the day? Okay? So my experience is upgrade everything. And again, do it on a test environment, no production. And still on the IOPS, what I found out after I went through the numbers, I found this. So first here, this is what Citrix tells you you need. It's not 0, it's like 7. At least they're not that bad. You need 0 IOPS. Yeah, no shit I need. And then the real world is like, this is like 7, this is like 80. And then if you talk to Chitan from Atlantis Computing, he's gonna tell you need 1,000. I don't know if you have seen his, his tweets, and one of the guys that works for him posted a graph on Twitter showing the IOPS utilization from a real customer, and it's like at peak, some users were doing like 10 million IOPS. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. So really, the bottom line here is, this is Citrix, so bullshit. Then we have real world, and then we have Atlantis. That, I would say it's bullshit too, but I like bigger bullshit, so I like this one better than the small one, okay? So keep that in mind. IOPS is critical, so whatever you are reading on the best practice, no. And the only way to really find out what is happening is testing, load testing. And again, plan for the worst, don't plan for the average. It's asking for trouble. So PVS, another component that, it was fun talking to Citrix SCEs and talking to, people facing the problems and the customers on a daily basis that may not be the Citrix SCEs. So first one that we see discussions all the time. Oh, physical or virtual? How many of you heard of the physical versus virtual discussions with PVS? So how many of you think doesn't matter? And that's exactly the case. Virtual does work. The problem, again, with virtual, you need to remember, it's on the hypervisor, and then, again, people, just because they are doing hypervisor, they think they can squeeze anything into the host. They are like, oh, yeah, no problem. I have 10 PVSs, and they are all running on the same host. That's not a good idea. If the host goes down, everything goes down. Plus 10 servers like that, tons of memory on a single host, no, it's not going to work. So just keep in mind the obvious stuff, but virtual does work and just fine. And of course, it's just much simpler to add more VMs than telling your boss, oh, we need another box. They don't like that. It's much easier. The PVS stores. Anyone doing on shared drives like Windows shares? No? No one? Am I the only crazy one doing it? Yes, seriously? No, Carl? No?
Down in my cut, they all use the
Local?
same.
The SAN? Okay.
Well, one does local only on physical.
Okay.
Rick
And
does NFS.
Yeah. No, I have many customers doing on just regular shares of Windows servers. If you apply the proper tweaks, and again, if you size the file server, that's one of the things that I noted. Even forget about PVS, just file servers in general. When you walk to an environment, very rarely I see a file server with, like, for example, tons of memory. People think, oh, it's a file server. Yeah, give you like 2 gigs and we are fine. Ideally, you want to load it up. Like, the more you can cache in RAM, the faster it's going to be. So the same thing applies here. If I have like a PVS and I find out, oh, I need 32 gigs of RAM on my PVS boxes, the file servers serving the PVS images, they should match the PVS in memory. So if I'm doing 32 gigs of RAM on the PVS, I actually need 32 gigs of RAM on the file server. So it's all cached in memory, and when the PVS requests something off the file server, The file server serves from memory. And that's why you load up the PVS with tons of memory, because you want to maximize the caching. Okay? So same thing applies here. It works just fine. Not sure if you guys saw this. Like, do you know Dan Allen? Dan Allen is one of the Citrix SCs in the US. We worked together for a year. One of my customers one day decides to go Citrix, and they're like, yeah, we're going to do Citrix. Okay. Have you ever done it? No. How many users? Oh, 50,000. And then they decided to do on their own. Didn't work that well. So then Dan came in, and I jumped in as well, and we worked together for a year doing that particular customer. And he wrote a blog post because he was like wondering why it doesn't work. Because at the beginning, that was the case. You would try the PVS, the store on a Windows server, and performance really sucked. So he decided to take a look why. So he monitored, did traces and everything, and then he found out there were registry keys that PVS by default would disable. And after changing the keys and so on, everything works fine. Okay, so keep that in mind. It works, and if you want more information, it will be on the slide and on the zip file, all the links, so you can read his post. And it's very good because it also explains how Windows in general caches stuff, and that's the reason for the memory on the file server, as I said. And then, of course, redundant, If you have one file server and that file server dies, you may be in trouble. Then there is another one, Citrix best practices. They tell you to disable 8.3 file creation on PVS images. That's actually in a Citrix document. And then people started doing, and with PVS, started breaking things. And then someone decided to take a look why. And that was the result. Well, Citrix, liars. They tell you to do it. Yeah, they're lying. And these are the two posts that you can check explaining why you cannot do that. Okay? Has to do, for example, with applications, Microsoft Office. It keeps certain things in registry using 8.3 format. And then you go and disable that. Well, guess what? Certain applications, they don't work anymore with PVS. Okay? So it's all here. Still on the PVS topic. Our vDisks, the whole thing about fixed and dynamic. Again, what are they saying? They were saying before you should do fixed. And then down the road, they changed their minds to, you should do dynamic. Which one? It varies, okay? I had cases. I prefer to do fixed for several reasons. But I had cases where we decided to go dynamic in a particular customer, and because of their own little world issues, it wouldn't work. Performance was horrible. I was trying to just do an update on an image, but not a small update. Actually, it was fairly large updates trying to apply to a new version of the image, and it wouldn't work. As soon as we switch it to fixed, everything is smooth. So again, dynamic versus fixed. As of today, the best practice is go dynamic. If you experience issues for whatever reason, you have two options. Go to fixed, we'll probably fix your issues, or you call Citrix and try to find why the dynamic's not working for you. In my case, I didn't want to bother calling Citrix, so I switched it to fixed. Boom, everything is working. That's good. Then regarding versions, I don't know how many people, that was another good one to discuss with several guys. With PVS, you can have an image, then you start creating versions, and then every, 5, you go and merge because of the chaining. You don't want to have many levels for performance reasons. The funny thing is, one guy, for example, that all of us here in the US know, if you go to the Citrix forums, there is one guy that posts a lot, answers questions. He's always on the IRC channel. It's Jerian Gibson. You heard the name? We heard the name. Great guy. He was with me actually in Canada a couple of weeks ago, presenting at the Citrix user group. So he really likes to actually, when he needs to update an image, he just goes the old way. He copies the image, imports that new copy to PVS, and then he changes that. So he never touches the image, no versions, nothing. Just a full-blown copy of the existing image. And after talking to many people, a ton of them actually prefer to do that. I don't know how you guys are doing. Updates, versions, copying. How are you guys doing, most of you? The copy? So you see? Anyone using like versioning? Versions? You see? So what is the best practice at the end of the day? Citrix says you can do versions and just make sure you merge them after you reach a certain number because of performance issues. But again, some people, they prefer to just copy the whole thing and get a new VDs. So my write cache. Again, this is like common sense. If there is something that is persistent that you want to keep, for example, antivirus updates, you can dump the updates to the write cache drive, not into the write cache itself. Because if it's the write cache and it's non-persistent, the server reboots, everything is gone, the server comes back and needs to download everything again. Okay? So just dump into the same drive, but don't leave on the write cache per se. Of course, certain vendors will not like that. I've seen AV vendors where if you try to do like, oh, you install the application here and you want to dump the update files on a different drive, no, we don't support that. So talk to the vendor first, okay? And this is one is interesting too because of the licensing with Citrix. If the licensing server goes down, then you have 30 days grace. But there are cases with XenApp, for example, where the cached information for the licensing, if it goes to the right cache and the server reboots, that information is gone. And then the XenApp cannot talk to the license server in case the license server is down. So your 30-day grace becomes 30 seconds grace. So just keep that in mind as well. So still on the PVS, offline, I talked to a bunch of people. Do you enable offline? I've heard like horror stories with enabling that. I never had any issues whatsoever. I don't know if I'm lucky, but again, there is really no best practice. What Citrix tells you is, it's actually funny. They tell you, do not enable, only enable when you go to production. Well, how am I going to test before production? So I need to enable that before production to see if it's working actually. And not to pray for, yeah, it will work in production. So that's a funny one on the Citrix best practice. Again, never had any problems, but I know people that had. So, test it. That's the best lesson here. RAM on the PVS, how much you need. There are some formulas like, yeah, do 2-3 gigs for the OS plus this much for each image that you are serving. Yeah, these are good starting guidelines. And what I learned along the way is if you do like 16 gigs to start with for like 2-3 images at the most, you should be fine. But again, the only way to determine that, to find out how much I actually need, is testing, is doing load testing. There is no other way. There is no magical, mystical number that I can give you. It's the same thing with how many people can I squeeze into a XenApp host. I don't know. It's very different running like a single DOS app and running, video editing, as I said. So load testing is the only way to determine. There is no magical number. For my targets, there is really nothing out there on the best practice that tells you, oh, do this. Like, this is how they're going to get to the image. I like BDM. Always works for me. Someone using BDM here? No? Am I the crazy one too? Yep. Yeah. So you like to deal with all the DHCP, TFTP, redundancy shit?
Well, when all your servers are physical, it's kind of hard to do BDM in a DR site.
Yeah. How many of you are doing PVS targets that are physical? You see one guy, so he's the crazy one. So if it's virtual, I prefer to just deal with an ISO file and done. But I've heard people saying, oh, then, I have 200 servers. How do I change that? Have you heard of scripting? Yeah, there's something called the scripts that you can write. It's like some mystical thing, and it works really well. Then you can change, 200 servers in one line. So I like BDM because I've seen also issues. And again, sometimes this may touch the network layer. And not all environments, you control everything. So now if you have the network people in your company, probably you guys have that, right? And when you have to talk to other people, oh boy, then you have a problem. They start asking, oh, why do you need that? I need it. Doesn't matter why, I need it. I'm telling you I need it. Oh, you need it redundant? No. So really a pain in the butt. BDM, I don't need to talk to anyone. Sometimes, I need to talk to the hypervisor guys. It may be the case. But usually they are easier than the networking people. I don't know if it's your experience, but it's mine. With the government, one story that I had, I was doing a project for one agency in Canada, and I asked the guy, oh, we need these 2 ports open, at the firewall. And they were like, oh, yeah, it takes 6 weeks to open a port in a firewall here. I'm like, man, you have a big firewall. Like 6 weeks? Jesus. Yeah. And they were like, yeah, it takes 6 weeks. Okay. Fine. Fine with me. I was billing 6 weeks for a firewall change. Awesome. That's why I'm an IT consultant for the government. I don't work much, and they get, I get my money, my tax money back. Bastards. Okay. Moving on. Still on the PVS, this is the last one. PVS traffic, there was the question all the time, should we separate or not? As of today, the best practices or the discussions, they led to do not need it. Unless you are paranoid, like I've seen people, oh, no, we have to keep everything separated for security reasons. Even in that case, like, I remember asking Thorsten about this, and he was like, don't do it. And he's crazy. He's a really good guy. If you never watched one of his sessions, go there, because you're going to feel really dumb at the end. Yeah. His sessions are like, man, I know shit. Like, I leave the room, I want to cry. It's like that. So really good guy. Enable auditing, obvious reasons. Then on the PVS image, that's another really funny one. I had a customer, a fairly large customer in South Africa, where the gold image really, man, like the size of the gold image, it was like gold, for them. Like it became really something, they could not lose the gold image. And why? Because they tried to recreate the gold image. Some mystical entity came one day and created the gold image for them. And they never automated the gold image creation process. There was some documents that were left behind. This is how it was done. They followed the thing. No one was able to make that one image work ever again. There was something that was done to a couple applications, and of course they were old applications, the vendor was gone, and that was it. Like, if they lost that gold image, they would never be able to bring the environment back. And thanks to the lack of automation, they were basically screwed. So it's very important. There is another guy, Aaron Parker. Did you hear about him? Do you know the guy I'm talking about? Aaron. Stealth Puppy. That's his Twitter handle. He's like an ex-convict from Australia, living here. He served his time. He's a smart guy. And he's really into like automating everything, and that's great. Because if you can automate, it means you can reproduce. So most people doing PVS, they forget about that. They just think, oh no, we have this image, we can deploy as many servers. Yeah, that's true, but what if you cannot recreate the image properly? So automation is really key. Documentation, does it help? Of course it does. But again, I may give you guys here, I'm very familiar, for example, with RDS, because that's what I do most of my time. If I give you an RDS 2012 document, one to each of you guys, we may end up with 50 different RDS environments at the end of the day. So automation, I really like automation. I give you a script, you run, that's it. If there is nothing to be asked on the script, the end result is going to be the same. Doesn't matter if it's one guy or 50. Documentation, you follow. I'm familiar with something, I forget something on the document because I'm so used to do that. Something that is obvious for me, I just skip for whatever reason. Then you are not that knowledgeable on that topic, and then you look at the document and you're like, it's asking something that I don't know the answer, and then you select the wrong one, and boom. Everything breaks. So Edge Site, another funny one. How many of you using Edge Site here? Yeah, the monitoring portion, the other components, or just the monitoring? Okay. So the best practice, like with Zen Desktop, that was a funny one. After talking to all these people, the best practice with Zen Desktop when doing Edge Site is to uninstall Edge Site. It's like, don't do it. Remove it, okay? Seriously, that's not a joke. And you talk to people, you hear all these horror stories, like Edge Site hammering in terms of I/O, like, man, crazy. But then, Jaren, for example, one guy, I was talking to him, he said, usually what we do for our customers, we have it, but we disable it. And when we need to collect information for whatever reason, then we enable only for that period of time. Sounds better than having it. Okay? Plus, no one knows what is going to happen with Edge Site down the road, so you have other options out there. Edge Site for load testing. One best practice. I don't know how many of you use load testing. Have you ever used Edge Site, ESLT? It's actually useful. I like ESLT. I have been using since before the acquisition several years ago. So pretty cool product. But one best practice here is disconnect your mouse, okay? That's serious. The idea here is when you create the scripts, if you start clicking, go click here, click there, when you play back, it's not gonna click in the right position. And then the script is gonna fail. Because it will think it clicked on a certain region of the screen and it actually didn't, and then the script halts. So get rid of your mouse, learn how to use the keyboard. There is a keyboard on computers, if you don't know that. Learn all the keys, the hotkeys, and that's how you record your script. SQL, of course, redundancy. But that's a funny one. Lots of people think we run our SQL server on a VM, on whatever hypervisor, we are safe. If that shit, crashes, it will pop up on another host. Yeah, I agree. But if the OS crashes and gets corrupted, whatever reason, all that crap is going to pop up on a different host. It's still crap on the different host. So it may not save you, okay? So if you want to keep your ass the way it is today, keep that in mind. If you are looking for a new job, don't keep that in mind. Citrix has even an article, like for example, regarding mirroring, what you can do to get AJ using mirroring. And make sure you have backups, okay? They are useful. And test the backups. Because I also had a customer, a really funny one. Of course, government. Government is always funny, I don't know why. So these guys, they are like, yeah, we have daily, hourly backups, and we dump into these tapes, and I was like, holy shit. First time I see the government worried about backups. And then they were getting all these tapes, like a ton of them every day. And then first they would store in a location on site, and then they would move off site. The funny thing was, there was another government agency on the same building. And on the room, that was, bad luck in a certain way. But the same room they were using to store the backups, like they had a cabinet, like right at the wall. On the wall behind, the other agency was doing some crazy tests with like really massive fans. And of course the fans, they were right at the wall. And I'm not talking about like fans like this. They were like, airplane size fans. All the magnetic interference from the fans, they were actually raising all the tapes on the other side of the wall. And they were not testing their backups. So one day shit happened, and then they were like, oh, let's restart from backup. First tape, oh, it's blank. What funny. Second tape, oh, it's blank too. And then they realized they had a cabinet of blank tapes. Okay? It wasn't really pretty what happened after that. So make sure you back up and you test your backups, okay? And SQL, again, depending on the component of Citrix that you are doing, there is one, for example, optimization specific for Zen Desktop that you should be doing in certain cases on your SQL server. It's on the articles as well. So the lesson here is, it's not like, oh, I have a SQL server done. I installed SQL. No, you may have to actually touch it and optimize the way writes are performed or caching and so on. And again, keep scalability in mind with SQL. I have seen that all the time. Like, we have a VM and this size is good. Well, it depends. Citrix has actually some guidelines in terms of how many requests you can have if the SQL server is this size and it's a virtual machine, if it's physical, all on the links here on the presentation. So just keep that in mind. Don't try to get like a SQL server with 1 gig of RAM and 1 CPU to serve like a 10,000 user environment. It's not going to work. So licensing. With Microsoft, Citrix, redundancy, Citrix says it's no big deal, again, because of the grace period. I mentioned the potential issue with PVS XenApp. So it's this file here. This is the article that explains how to avoid the issue. But the problem is, it's actually a big deal if you are doing XenApp. Well, if you are doing anything that touches an RDS licensing server. And why it's a big deal? Because RDS, if there is no licensing server, there is no log on. So even though your Citrix is good for 30 days, your RDS is good for 30 seconds. So you have to have a way to handle RDS licensing failure. I don't know you guys, but most places I've seen, they deploy RDS licensing and Citrix licensing on the same server. Do you guys do that? Yeah? No? Do you have RDS license? Okay, that's good. Okay. So if you have RDS, usually I have 2 RDS licensing servers because then you can point the XenApp environment to both licensing servers. Okay? Microsoft legally, if you have, let's say, 1,000 RDS client access license, you should split them like 500 and 500. That's the legal way. The Claudio way is like, I don't give a shit. I install 1,000 on each license server. I just call the clearinghouse and I tell them, yes, server 1 crashed. I need another 1,000. And they give you another 1,000. It's probably legal. Do I care? No. It just works best. Okay? So you can do that. But keep in mind, 2 RDS licensing servers. Yeah, don't tell Microsoft I told you that. I'll make sure I erase this later. Scalability, that is really a best practice bullshit. If you read the Citrix documents, they are like, oh yeah, you need this. Well, you need that if you have more than 712,000 licenses requests per hour. Do you have that? So see, no one has that. It's like asking Citrix, oh, how many customers you have with 20,000 Zen Desktop licenses? They'll tell you they have like lots. I have never seen one. Have you ever seen one? Yeah. It's like a unicorn. So it's bullshit. So web interface, some of the best practices is split XML brokers. So you don't point the web interfaces to the same XML brokers. You actually split them. Again, in case you are not doing smart load balancing of the brokers using something like a NetScaler. If you are doing, then this does not apply. If you don't have a fancy load balancer, then this actually applies. And then, of course, if you are doing your access gateways, you have to point to everything that your web interfaces are seeing, okay? As I said, if you have intelligent load balancing like the NetScalers, then you don't need that. There's some adjustment that can be done, that should be done, as per this article, on socket pooling and timeouts. And if you ask Citrix, their best practice is get rid of web interface and go to storefront, right? That's what they tell you. Yeah. Easier said than really done. Especially when a storefront doesn't really have all the features that web interface has. So then it's like, yeah, it's bullshit, Citrix. But the problem is, yeah, you may have to go to therapy. You have to let the web interface go at one point, okay? Question?
Question about storefront. It seems to get Citrix working on things like Google Chromebooks. Storefront's the only supported by. Have you ever seen a customer trying to do that?
Yes, I've seen, yeah.
Emphasis on try.
Yeah.
Yes. But, the lesson here, based on your question, is this. With certain receivers, like certain releases, now we are seeing more and more ties to the storefront. So, as I said, we have to let it go, the web interface. I like the web interface, but if Citrix is like releasing receiver for whatever, oh, it doesn't work with the web interface. Well, then what? I have no other option, okay? So again, you should see a therapist for your web interface. But the funny thing is later you're going to need another therapist to deal with storefront, to get it working properly. Because again, storefront is a pain in the butt in many ways. But again, if it's the only thing supported, you're going to have to go for storefront. There is no other way around it. So the best practice, that's a funny one. You read the best practices documents for storefront, and the last one that I found, like the latest thing, it was back in July. I may be wrong here, but I haven't seen anything newer than July 2012 in terms of storefront best practice. And the best practice based on Citrix, it's right there on the document. Do not deploy it on an enterprise environment. But you are telling us to get rid of the web interface and go for a storefront. That's why you need a therapist, because it gets really crazy. So they say get rid of web interface and go to storefront, and then you read the storefront best practice, and it's right there. Do not use a storefront if you're an enterprise. When the vendor is saying not to use something in an enterprise environment, it probably has issues. And they don't want to tell you that. But then the funny part is, if you are a new customer, yes, use storefront. So what I learned after reading the storefront best practices is, it's, you know, you can piss off the new customers, but not the old ones. And it's right there on the document, like, yeah, new customers go for storefront, old customers, no, avoid it. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. You know, piss off the new guy, but not the old ones. So as I said, unfortunately, web interface, or fortunately, depends who you ask, it's going the way of the dodo. You know, remember that bird? Some people say it was a really tasty bird. I didn't taste it. Too bad. Okay, so again, you are going to have to deal with storefront. So conclusion here. Most of the best practices, actually, after going through all the links, they make sense, okay? But not everything that is there will necessarily apply to your particular environment. Again, see best practices as a starting point guideline. And then out of that, check what actually makes sense for your particular needs and environment. And not only, I really emphasize that, not only from a technical standpoint, because again, many IT people, they have this tendency of always trying to go for the best from a technical perspective. Again, a business is not only technical. There may be political reasons, there may be business reasons why you cannot always follow best practices. Again, like the whole thing about zoning or multiple farms or multiple sites. I had issues that were really political. IT groups on each part of the country, they wouldn't let it go. No, we have to be in control here. The only way was like, okay, well, we are going to need, 200 Citrix farms if you want to do that. Yes, we want to do that. Okay, here's the bill. I'm happy to deploy 200 Citrix farms manually. It's going to take me 10 years. And by the time I'm done, I will have to upgrade to XenApp 7. Another 10 years. Good. IOPS. Again, no one really knows. That's the answer. You can ask 10 different vendors. They will give you 10 different numbers. I prefer to go high on the IOPS and plan for the worst. And guarantee the user experience. Because again, we are trying to replace something that doesn't get affected by multiple people turning on their PCs. And I can give more horsepower to the PC easily by adding like an SSD. If you're trying to do that, replace that with something that is virtual, hosted, well, you need to keep that in mind. Again, think about what you are replacing. So, questions and answers. I may not know the answers, but you can ask them. Any questions? Any comments?
Yeah, Rick D should still be maintaining his list and keeping it up to date.
Exactly. What are you doing, Rick?
Yeah, slacking.
Well, a little bit of one anyway.
No, now he's the big CTO, so probably not working much. That's why he's here in London, speaking at BriForum.
It's all bonbons these days.
I know. Living the dream.
Yeah.
That's it. I like that. So any questions on the best practices? No? All bullshit or? Yeah, makes sense?
It wouldn't be a Claudio session without some bullshit, would it?
No, I guess not. No.
That's what we appreciate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I try to be honest and no bullshit. Some vendors don't appreciate that, but what can I do, you know?
Anything on Server 2012 yet?
Regarding,
Best practice?
go for 2012. That's the best practice right now.
Actually, I picked up some from you yesterday on that.
Yeah?
Yeah, the whole desktop experience shit. But it's not exposed to the UI. You got to install the damn thing by PowerShell.
Well, it is exposed on the UI,
It is.
but it's like hidden. It's under features. It's not a rule. Yeah. But it's there. So no questions? Man, you guys are easy or it's too early. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe it's too early. Yeah, I know that. It's tough. Well, if we have no questions, then I'm out of here. I'll go drink. I know you guys here in the UK starts drinking at like 5 in the morning. So I like that. Okay, guys. Well, thanks. If you need anything, just email me, okay?